The late summer sky bathed the dry grasslands of the American West in gold. The evening sunlight stretched quietly over the cracked dirt road, where the worn tires of a pickup truck had just come to a stop. The door opened. Harold stepped out, his boots crunching against the dry earth, creating a low, solitary sound. He didn't need a map. This used to be home. The place where he grew up. The place he left 8 years ago to enlist. But Harold knew, he was no longer the man who had walked away back then. War had left its marks on his face, new lines not from age. A quiet gaze no longer lit by faith. His once straight back now stooped slightly from years of carrying a pack. A rifle. And pain. Post-discharge diagnosis, chronic back pain. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And a long list of sedatives. Therapy sessions, but none of it had truly healed him. Every night, the sound of gunfire returned in his dreams. But there was one thing that had once kept his spirit from completely collapsing. One soul that had fought beside him, slept beside him, and during a brutal firefight, had dragged him out of the kill zone, saving his life with 4 strong legs and eyes that never backed down. Rex, the military dog, his comrade, his best friend. When Harold was medically discharged, he believed Rex had also retired and had been adopted by another family. That was common. He had tried to believe it. But weeks passed, then months. No one contacted him about Rex. No paperwork, no email, not a word from his old unit. That silence was worse than any refusal. And it was that very silence that brought Harold back to the place he once called home, not to find peace, but to find Rex. He took a deep breath. In the wind, there was the scent of dry grass, of dust, and something else. The smell of something that had died. Not a corpse, but a broken promise, a wound left uncleaned. Harold shut the truck door, his eyes drifting toward the horizon. His shadow stretched across the earth like the shadow of a wandering soul. He whispered, "Wait for me, Rex, I will find you." Harold was not the kind of man who gave up. Not on the battlefield, and certainly not in the mission to find Rex. Ever since he realized he couldn't just sit and wait for news about his 4-legged friend. Harold began a different kind of journey, no less grueling than any military operation he had ever endured. At first, there were polite phone calls, to his old unit, to the military working dog, MWD, program coordinator. The initial responses were always the same: "We'll check the records." He might still be in transition. Or worse, silence. Then came the veteran groups. The closed forums of those who had once served alongside him. Harold followed every comment thread. Every post about war dogs forgotten after combat. Somewhere, someone had heard of a private training facility on the outskirts, where some military dogs were temporarily sent to await processing. An old friend, now a retired K9 handler, let slip a strange company name, Canis Vitae Services. No website, no official office, just a name tied to a vague address behind an abandoned industrial site outside Amarillo. To most people, that would have been a dead end. To Harold, it was a target. 3 days later, he stood before a rusted chain-link fence. Grass growing waist-high. A battered shipping container sat sunken in a forgotten field, nearly swallowed by nature. Everything here reeked of abandonment. Then Harold heard it, the sound of dragging chains. His heart pounded. He moved toward the back of the container. Dust rose with each step. And then he saw Rex. A frame reduced to skin and bone. The once glossy coat now matted with dirt. Old wounds unhealed, mixed with new ones, raw and festering. The eyes that once shone across desert missions now dull. Like ashes. Harold choked. He called softly, "Rex, it's me." No response. He stepped closer and whispered a command in German, one only the two of them had ever used. "Sits." A beat of silence. Then Rex's ears twitched. His head lifted slightly. The clouded eyes strained to find something familiar. And for the first time in countless months, that thin, frail tail gave a faint wag. Slow, but real. A low whimper. Rex tried to rise, his whole body trembling. Harold rushed forward, dropping to his knees. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so damn late." He pulled the frail body into his arms, tears falling onto matted fur. In that moment, there were no ranks, no soldier and comrade, only a man holding the last living piece of his own soul, barely breathing in a world that had tried to forget them both. Rex lay motionless on the cold steel table of the rural veterinary clinic. His trembling body now only a shadow of the warrior who once walked through fire and gunfire. The flickering fluorescent light above reflected off his matted fur, caked with mud and dried blood. Harold sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the chair, eyes locked on Rex without blinking. The familiar sounds of war, bombs dropping, jets roaring, seemed to echo again in his head. But this time, the one being destroyed was his heart. The door creaked open. A woman entered, small-framed, in her 50s, but with sharp, steady eyes shaped by years of grit and compassion. Dr. Maria Hernandez, a veteran herself, had served in veterinary relief missions across Iraq and Afghanistan. She didn't need to ask who Harold was. The fire in his eyes told her everything. She approached Rex, gently lifting each paw, examining each wound with practiced silence. The minutes dragged like hours. Then, she sighed. "He's been starved, at least a few weeks. Maybe longer," she said slowly. "Severe malnutrition, skin infection, and these scars." She paused, pressing a hand gently against the loose, scarred skin on Rex's side. Some of them look like repeated trauma, not accidents, abuse. Harold turned away, jaw clenched. He didn't want to let the fury erupt here, in this place where only Rex and the raw truth remained. "I'll do everything I can," Dr. Hernandez said, her voice softening, "but you should know, he may never fully recover. Not just physically, but in trust." Harold rose from his seat, stepped closer to the table, and placed a hand gently on Rex's back. "You don't know him," he whispered. "Rex doesn't quit, never did. If I'm still standing after the war, it's because of him. Now it's my turn." Rex cracked open his eyes. Just a faint glimmer, but in the world of the forgotten, one glimmer is enough to begin again. Outside, the sun was setting, but inside that small clinic, a new fire had just been lit, a fire of life, of loyalty, and of a promise never to let go. That night, under the dim light of an old kitchen lamp, Harold sat in front of his laptop. Rex, wrapped in a clean blanket, lay asleep beside him. The wounds still oozed blood, but at least now, he was no longer alone. Harold took a photo, not out of pity, but as evidence. The photo was an undeniable truth. A warrior dog, once serving on the battlefield, now skin and bones, eyes dull, lying on a torn blanket in the cold steel compartment of a discarded life. He wrote a single line beneath the image. "He once saved my life. Now it's my turn to save his." Is this how we treat silent heroes? No hashtags, no outrage, just the truth. He hit post, and then, like a spark falling into dry brush, within less than an hour, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Then thousands. Comments began pouring in. People cried. People raged. People shared stories of dogs they had once served alongside, lost, abandoned, or sold off to nameless private organizations. "He's a warrior. How could they let him die in silence? I had a K9 named Leo. Went missing after a mission in Syria. This needs to be exposed. Thank you, Harold. Thank you for not staying silent." Then came the media. A local news station sent a reporter to Harold's ranch, beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, with Rex resting quietly in his arms. Harold told the entire story for the first time on camera. "Rex never hesitated to stand between me and death. He ran into gunfire without a command. He never asked why. He just protected me. Now, I'm just doing the same. There's no need for justification." The story spread like wildfire. National television, animal protection organizations, veterans, even people who had never known war, all raised one voice. "We've forgotten these heroes for far too long." Rex was no longer just a dog. He had become a symbol of loyalty betrayed, and of a friendship that refused to be broken by silence or injustice. And Harold, the man who once survived because of Rex, was now the voice for the four-legged souls still waiting to be heard. The small countryside home where Harold lived had now become the first shelter in a long journey of healing. He cleaned out the empty room next to the kitchen, laid down a soft rug, placed a warm cushion, and prepared all the medications prescribed by the vet. Each day became a meticulous routine: cooking bone broth, crushing pills, cleaning wounds, changing bandages, applying ointments, and staying by Rex's side, without leaving for even a moment. But the hardest part wasn't the physical care. It was the emptiness in Rex's eyes. There were mornings when Rex lay motionless, his gaze seeming to pierce through everything. No barking, no reaction, no longer the fierce warrior of the past, but a ghost. Lost in a world that once belonged to him. Harold didn't push him, he simply sat there, recounting the stories they had lived together, from operations in the Iraqi desert to freezing nights at the Syrian border. Where Rex had bitten through detonation cords before Harold could shout. Where he had once stood between Harold and a sniper in the dark. Those stories weren't just for Rex. They were medicine for Harold too. Sometimes, he read aloud from books. Sometimes, he simply whispered, "You don't have to fight anymore. Rex, here, you get to live." And then, one morning, when Harold walked in with a bowl of warm porridge, Rex stood up. Not firmly, not strongly, but he stood. It was the day Harold broke down and cried like a child. From that moment on, every small step felt like a victory. A tail wag, a slow walk toward the door at the sound of birdsong, a gentle tap of the nose against Harold's hand, just like the old days. Before every patrol, a month later, they began taking slow walks around the lake near their home. Rex's steps were still unsteady, but his eyes, now lit again with that old fire, followed Harold's every move. As if he had never stopped believing. Harold told their growing online community. "He's learning to trust people again. And I'm learning to live without hiding from the past." Rex was no longer a soldier. But he had returned to himself. No more growling, no more fear. Only the calm of a soul that had walked through war, and chosen to come back with loyalty. That night, though the sky held no rain, Harold jolted awake as if he had just escaped a storm. Sweat soaked his back, his hands clutched the blanket tightly. And his eyes stared wide into the silent darkness. In his mind, an image from Kandahar returned, screaming. Gunfire. And the bloodied face of a fallen comrade beside him. The air felt suffocating. He couldn't breathe. Harold sat up abruptly, his hands clutching his head, his heart pounding as if it might burst. Then, a soft sound. A paw step. Rex. Somehow, he had climbed onto the bed without Harold noticing. Quiet, like a desert breeze easing through the heat. No barking, no whining. He simply walked over to Harold and gently placed one paw on his chest. No force, no demand, just presence. Rex's eyes caught the faint hallway light. No longer the hollow gaze from the day they were reunited, but a look that knew that the man before him was battling invisible things no one else could see. Harold took that paw in his hand. The same paw that had crossed minefields. That had stepped across burning sands. That had once pulled him back from the brink of death. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking like shattered glass. Rex pressed closer, resting his head gently on Harold's leg. A small exhale, peaceful, as if to say, "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." The panic in Harold eased, like waves softening as they met the shore. His chest loosened. He placed his hand on Rex's head, stroking in rhythm with the dog's steady breath. The two of them fell asleep again. But this time, there were no nightmares, no shaking, no gunshots echoing from the past. Only steady breathing, an embrace, and a wordless reminder, we're still alive. It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon. Clear skies, a light breeze, children's laughter echoing along the dusty red road. Harold and Rex were following their usual weekend routine, stopping by the small corner store in town to grab a coffee and a pack of jerky for Rex. Harold pulled up under the shade of an old oak tree, opened the door, and gave Rex a gentle pat on the head. "Wait here, buddy, just a few minutes." Rex sat calmly in the passenger seat, his eyes steady, like he was guarding the world. As Harold disappeared behind the store's glass door, the chime rang behind him. Another man walked in, not familiar. Head lowered, a hoodie pulled up to shadow half his face. He moved quietly, scanning the store. But something felt off. Rex sensed it before anyone. No eye contact, just instinct. The kind of instinct honed by a warrior who once learned to sniff out fear in a battlefield. Inside the car, Rex sat upright, ears perked, eyes locked on the store entrance. Then, inside, the scream rang out. Glass shattered. A little girl's terrified cry echoed through the store. The stranger had pulled a gun. In the chaos, he grabbed the smallest child in the store, held the weapon to her head, shouting incoherent threats. Harold froze near the back shelf. Training kicked in, but he didn't need to act. Because Rex already had. The truck door flew open. The leash slipped free from the handle, just like they had practiced. Back when Bolt, now Rex, was trained for special missions. Not a bark, not a growl, just sharp, decisive movement. Rex bolted through the entrance, gliding between shelves like a shadow. 1 second. 2. The gunman never had time to react. From behind, Rex lunged, jaws locking onto the man's arm holding the weapon. The gun fell to the floor with a clatter. The girl rushed into Harold's arms. Rex didn't maul. He didn't rage. He pinned the attacker down, controlled, precise, as if he were still on duty in uniform. When the police arrived, Rex simply sat beside the trembling gunman, tail swaying gently, as if to ask Harold, "Did I do good, Dad?" The story didn't stay in the small town. Security footage aired on national news. They called Rex the silent warrior. From forgotten soldier to living symbol of loyalty and courage, not just for what he had done in war, but for what he still chose to do, after everything he had endured. Right after the miraculous rescue, Harold was no longer the solitary man haunted by war memories. And Rex, the dog once forgotten in a steel cage, had now become a living symbol of hope. Not just for veterans, but for all of America. The next morning, Harold received a thick envelope sealed with a golden embossed national crest. Inside was an official letter from Washington, D.C. Mr. Harold Jackson, we respectfully invite you and Rex to attend the National Memorial Ceremony honoring military working dogs. In recognition of your moving story and the courage of your loyal companion, Rex. Harold read the letter 3 times. His hand trembled slightly. He looked down at Rex, now lying peacefully in the sun. His coat full and gleaming. His eyes bright and calm. Rex lifted his head slightly, as if he understood. Harold smiled. Looks like we've got a new mission, old friend. The memorial ceremony that day drew thousands. Veterans, military officers, children waving small flags, families who had lost loved ones or comrades in war. As Harold stepped onto the stage, Rex walked beside him, wearing a vest adorned with medals. The crowd fell silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Harold didn't read from a speech. He just spoke from the heart. They said war would change me. And it did. But what I didn't expect was that Rex carried wounds just like mine. Not on his legs, but in his trust. Not in his ears, but in his heart. He never had to say a word. Every scar on his body told the story, for loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. It wasn't the war that broke him. It was us, because we forgot. Silence swept through the audience. A few wept. Harold looked up again. But love brought Rex back. And now it's our turn. To do right by every 4-legged warrior who's been left behind. From that speech, a nonprofit was born. Rex's second mission. Its goals: to locate, rescue, and rehabilitate military working dogs abandoned after service. To pair trauma-affected veterans with service dogs, creating healing bonds for both. Rex's face became the logo. His image appeared on banners, T-shirts, social media campaigns. Stories poured in from all corners of the country. A dog found locked in a freezer at a private security firm. A war dog dumped into a nameless kennel after its unit disbanded. A veteran who nearly took his own life, until he met a forgotten dog. Just like himself. Each story, each soul, was saved. Each step Rex now took extended far beyond the quiet country house. He was no longer just the dog who saved Harold in war. He had become something greater. The bridge between survival and humanity. Not long after the organization, Rex's second mission, began gaining real traction. Harold received an anonymous email. No subject, no signature. Just one chilling line. Don't dig too deep. Some dogs were trained to serve, not to be saved. Harold sat motionless in his small kitchen. The pale blue glow of his laptop screen reflected in eyes that had once stared death in the face. His hand clenched tightly around the mouse. Rex lay under the table, letting out a low, guttural growl, as if sensing something was deeply wrong. 3 days later, at 3 a.m., an unmarked vehicle silently stopped outside Harold's gate. 2 figures, dressed head to toe in black, climbed over the back fence without a sound. But Rex was already awake. He lifted his head. Ears perked. A faint snarl escaped, not a bark, but a cold, calculated warning. Harold, just roused from a familiar nightmare, instantly understood what was happening. He grabbed the pistol from the drawer and flipped on the porch light. At that exact moment, a violent knock echoed from the back door. A window shattered. One intruder was halfway through the frame when Rex launched like lightning, clamping down hard on the man's knife-wielding arm. The scream that followed shattered the stillness of the rural night. The second man fled. Police arrived within 15 minutes. The injured intruder, severely wounded, said nothing except a fake name. But it didn't take long for investigators to confirm he was a mercenary. Former contractor for a private K-9 training facility previously sued for animal abuse. The same facility where Rex had been held after Harold's discharge. Everything became clearer. Someone, or some group, didn't want the past exposed. The next morning, Rex rested on his blanket after having his minor leg wound cleaned and bandaged. Harold stood on the porch, staring out at the vast fields stretching toward the horizon. His eyes were no longer searching for peace. They belonged to a soldier. To a man who had remembered why he was still alive. He walked back inside, opened his laptop, and began typing. If someone wants to silence me, then I must speak louder. Not just for Rex, but for every dog who fought for this country and was forgotten by it. That new post, this time, a video clip from Harold's security camera showing Rex taking down the intruder, spread rapidly across the internet. It wasn't just action footage. It was proof. Rex was no longer just an emotional symbol. He was a witness. The story outgrew sentiment. It became a case. An independent group of investigative journalists began tracking shady contracts tied to military dog retention companies. Congressional representatives started mentioning Harold's name during hearings. A federal investigation was proposed. Yet in the small country house where Rex now slept peacefully after his brief battle, Harold knew they weren't safe yet, not because of enemies, but because the truth hadn't fully come to light. He placed his hand gently on Rex's head and whispered, "We started this because of a memory. Now we finish it, for justice." 3 days after the break-in, Harold received a call from the state senator's office. A sharp, urgent female voice came through. "Mr. Harold? I'm the senior policy aide for Senator Warren. The office would like to meet with you. Privately. It concerns the 2016 K-9 decommission program." Harold froze. That program had once been brushed off by the media. But from what he'd heard, it was a covert system for redistributing military dogs to private contractors. Under the guise of retraining, but in reality, it was designed to profit off civilian security contracts overseas. And Rex had once been on that list. The next day, Harold drove to the state legislative building. He wore a simple gray shirt, but his eyes carried the weight of resolve. Rex sat beside him in the truck, calm and alert, as if sensing that his human was walking into another kind of battlefield, this time. Not with bullets, but with the truth. The meeting took place behind closed doors. No cameras, just 3 people: Harold, the policy aide, and a retired senator, once removed from the Defense Committee for opposing the K-9 decommission program. The senator looked Harold in the eye, his voice steady but heavy. "I tried to stop it, but they buried everything too well. Fake records, shell companies, and dogs don't talk." Harold replied, "But I do, and Rex is still alive." The senator pulled out a sealed red folder. "This is the transfer list of military dogs to private entities between 2016 and 2020. Rex is here, but listed under a different name, temporarily owned by a contractor in Eastern Europe, who's been accused of training dogs for illicit violence." Harold felt a weight crush his chest. He had thought Rex was just abandoned. But it turned out, Rex had been used. Like a rented weapon. The moment he left the meeting room, Harold received another anonymous text. "Back off. Don't make yourself the next target." He didn't reply. Instead, he began gathering every piece of evidence he could. Invoices, fake contracts, photos of Rex during training cycles, veterinary reports showing marks of restraint, and finally, a leaked video. Rex in a holding pen, a trainer screaming commands, and the sound of an electric prod, forcing compliance. Harold refused to stay silent any longer. He appeared in an exclusive interview with a major news network. On national television, he didn't cry. But his eyes never left the lens. I'm not telling this story for pity. I'm telling it because there are still so many dogs like Rex, discarded, used as tools, tortured under the name of national security. And if no one else will speak, then I will. The media storm erupted. Veterans shared their stories. A congressional emergency hearing was scheduled. A federal investigation was launched. And Harold was invited to testify as the key witness. That evening, after a full day of questions from reporters, Harold returned home. He sat quietly on the porch, next to Rex, who now lay peacefully, head resting on Harold's leg, eyes closed but ears still attentive. Harold whispered, "You didn't just save me on the battlefield, Rex. You just helped save those who can't speak for themselves." But Harold also knew, behind every spotlight, there are shadows. And those shadows wouldn't sit still while their secrets were being exposed. Could he and Rex take on an entire system? The halls of Congress echoed with the footsteps of reporters, senators, and a large crowd gathered for a special hearing. Investigation into the fate of military dogs post-service. But the focus of the day wasn't a general or a politician. It was a soldier named Harold, and a dog named Rex. Harold walked into the chamber amid murmurs, flashing cameras, and curious eyes. He wore a simple white shirt. No medals, no bravado. But his eyes were those of a man who had seen the truth, and lived to tell it. Rex walked beside him. No vest, no leash. Free, steady, unapologetic. Every step seemed to whisper, "I am no longer property. I am a witness." Presiding over the session was Senator Evelyn Rhodes, an elderly black woman who had lost her only son in the Iraq War. Her voice was deep and unwavering. "We are not here just to hear the truth. We are here to correct a wrong." Harold took his seat. A clerk handed him a glass of water. He didn't touch it. When the mic lit up, he began, not dramatic, not angry. "I didn't come here to assign blame. I came to tell you what happened." He spoke of the day he found Rex, skin and bones, shaking in a forgotten cage. He spoke of the K-9 decommission program, the fake names, the buried contracts. He played a video, Rex being electro-shocked, not for training, but for obedience. And finally, he placed Rex's old collar on the desk, dusty, partially scorched. They called him decommissioned military equipment. But to me, and to thousands of soldiers out there, he was a friend, a comrade, family. The room fell silent. A young senator wiped away tears. Rex sat still, his gaze fixed on the front row, as if watching who was truly listening. Then came a question. "Harold, do you have proof this was a systemic issue? Not just an isolated case?" Harold said nothing. He placed a stack of printed files on the desk. A list of over 200 dogs, shell companies, training contracts with signs of money laundering, veterinary notes indicating torture, and crucially, a whistleblower statement from a former trainer confirming the program's intent to convert dogs into private reconnaissance weapons for international sale. The entire chamber shuddered. Senator Rhodes leaned back in her chair. Her voice sharpened. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer a story about an abandoned dog. This is a criminal investigation into the abuse and trafficking of military animals." The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end of the day, 3 formal declarations were issued. 1. Immediate suspension of all military dog distribution contracts with private companies. 2. Launch of a federal investigation under congressional oversight. 3. Formation of a military K-9 rights oversight committee, with Harold invited as honorary advisor. When Harold and Rex stepped out of the Capitol, the crowd lining the marble steps erupted in applause, not for a war hero, but for integrity. For a dog once discarded, now standing as a living symbol of courage and healing. That night, Harold stood by the window of a modest apartment in D.C., hand gently resting on Rex's head. "We're not done yet, Rex," he whispered. "There are still hundreds of your brothers out there, waiting to hear their names." The lights of the Capitol shimmered in Rex's eyes. And in the silence, both understood. Their battle was no longer about surviving. It was about changing the system. That November, a bronze statue was unveiled at the National Veterans Square. It wasn't the image of a decorated general, nor a soldier with a raised rifle. It was a military dog, standing tall, ears perked, eyes fixed on the horizon. Etched into the base were just a few words. Rex, the comrade who never gave up. Harold stood quietly in the crowd. The leash in his hand no longer tugged. Rex didn't have the strength to climb the podium anymore. Old age had finally caught up with the four-legged soldier. Rex lay gently on a blanket beneath the grass, eyes half closed under the golden light of dusk. But when the drums began to roll, and the military march echoed through the square, Rex lifted his head, took one deep, slow breath, as if to offer his final salute. His legacy had outgrown statistics. With the compensation Harold received after the congressional hearing, and hundreds of thousands in donations from strangers moved by their story, Rex's watch was born. But it wasn't just a rescue shelter for retired military dogs. It became a watchdog organization tracking the discharge and distribution of K9 units. A therapy center for veterans grieving the loss of their dogs. A reunification service connecting former handlers with the dogs they once served beside. And most importantly, a place to remember, where every dog had a name, every loss had a story, and every K9 was honored as a soldier, not a tool. Years later, a group of middle school students visited Harold's center. They stood in line, gazing up at a large black and white portrait of Rex in tactical gear. His bright eyes still fierce. A small scar visible on his left cheek. A brown-skinned girl raised her hand. "Sir, do you think Rex knew he changed the law?" Harold smiled gently. "Sweetheart, I'm not sure Rex even knew what a law was. But I believe he knew he was never forgotten. And that a whole country stood up because of him." That night, Harold returned to the hill behind the ranch, where Rex now rested, buried beneath the old oak tree. He sat down, placed a quiet hand on the stone that read, "Rex, not just a dog. A warrior, a friend, proof that love never surrenders." The wind whispered softly. Somewhere in the distance, the bark of a dog echoed from the recovery shelter. Harold smiled. "Sleep well, old friend. And thank you for teaching me how to rise when the world told me to kneel." We've just journeyed through a story filled with tears, hope, and healing. A story that's not only about war, not only about a dog's loyalty, but about resilience and the saving power of love. Harold, a soldier who seemed to have lost everything after war. And Rex, a military dog, abandoned, wounded, and nearly forgotten. But when two scarred souls found each other again, neither of them was a victim anymore. They became healers for one another. And they didn't just survive. They changed an entire system, bringing hope to hundreds of other four-legged warriors once labeled as no longer in service. What lesson do we carry from this story? That loyalty has no expiration date. That one person, or one dog, given a second chance, can rewrite history. And that sometimes, the quietest heroes are the ones who never speak. If you've ever felt forgotten by the world, if you carry wounds no one else can see, remember this: you can still be a light for someone else, just as Harold was for Rex. And Rex made an entire nation look inward. In the next video, I'll share the most heartbreaking chapter, when a military dog didn't live long enough to reunite with his soldier. But what remains after that death is a miracle. If you want to hear the rest, type "continue" in the comments below. Dedicated to every soldier, two-legged or four. Those who never surrendered. You are not forgotten. And I'll see you in the next video.